All right. So,
Welcome.
oh, honestly, I'm so out of practice for this. Welcome to What Shall We Say to These Things?
I'm TJ,
And I'm MJ.
and this is a low-key ghetto Bible study.
That is correct. So we're continuing with Genesis. We've done chapter 12. We continuing with Abram. I never pronounced this right. And Sarai's story with Genesis chapter 13. So, this is the point where we ask you to pause and say a prayer.
All right, so let's get into our summary.
Sorry, I misplaced my notes.
I think, before I get into something, I feel like in comparison to chapter 12, this is a little mellow. It's a bit mellow, but let's get into it. So as usual, our chapter is divided into two sections, and our first section is verses 1 to 9.
Okay.
So, we're continuing from where chapter 12 left off. So we have Abraham leaving Egypt, and he's taking his wife and everything he owned with him, and his nephew Lot goes with him. And we're told that Abraham has accumulated a lot of wealth in the form of cattle and silver and gold. And he travels. And one version of the Bible I read, he said he traveled to the Negev. And I was like, to the Negev? What's that? And apparently it's a desert. Okay, so it's a desert near... Let me not misspeak. So just say it's a desert in that part of the world.
Okay.
And from there, he went from place to place until he got back to Bethel, where he had been earlier and where he had previously built an altar. And he stopped there and he called on the name of the Lord. Now, we are reminded at this point that Lot was traveling with him. And we are informed that Lot was also a wealthy man. He had cattle and he had tents and he had people with him. And basically where they had settled did not have enough resources to support the wealth of the two men.
Okay.
And as a result, their herders or their shepherds or their workers began to have disagreements and arguments. And we are told that they were also Canaanites, and I'm not sure that I will pronounce this right, Perizzites, living in the area at that time. And so that brings us to the end of verse 9. This was our first section. So what stood out to you? What are your thoughts?
First thing I noticed is that we talk about I am jumping ahead, and it talks about where Abraham ends up.
My bad. Sorry.
There's another piece?
Yes, there's
Okay.
another piece. I had to turn the page. Okay. This is why I need to fit everything on one page. Okay. So that was not chapter 9. We ain't at chapter 9 yet. Okay. So basically what happens next is Abraham tells Lot, we're family, right? Let's not argue. Let's not have arguing between us or our workers. Look at all this land that's available. Let us go our separate ways. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go right, I will go left. That is chapter 9. Verse 9, sir. That is verse 9.
Okay. Yes. So I'm jumping ahead of the first few verses, and I'm getting to the point where he ends up where he ends up. So he's left Egypt and he ends up back in Bethel. And it's like the way a lot of it is written is as though he moved in a circle. Either he moved in a circle, he went backwards. And I would not be comfortable doing that, because like God is leading me to a place, and although going to Egypt was done for safety, for survival purposes, to me I would be frustrated having to go back in the direction I came. Like, either let's keep going past Egypt, or I don't want to go back.
But okay, let's think of this situation, right? Let's say you're here, right? And there are difficult times here, and there's an opportunity for you just temporarily to go spend time in another territory. When you're done there, wouldn't you want to come back home?
But who says this is home?
No, because here's my challenge, right? We don't have a timeline. We don't know how long he's been in any particular place, right? All we know for sure is that he's built an altar there.
Okay.
And so it may just be that this is somewhere where he's comfortable being settled, where he's aware of what the available resources are. This is somewhere that, he may have even developed relationships with the surrounding merchants. So it may not necessarily even have been a thing for him where he considered it as going backward, but it may have been like, this is somewhere where I know the lay of the land.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that was.
But you also would have had a challenge going in the first place when you don't know where you're going.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of the Israelites who seem to have been moving in circles for a while, right? Yeah,
40 years.
Yeah. And then I also noted that he gets to his landing spot and he worships God again. That was significant to me. Yeah.
My first point was that in Genesis chapter 12 we find Pharaoh kicking Abraham out of Egypt, right? But that was just Abraham. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, right? But Lot could have stayed. I feel like Lot could have stayed because it says Lot went with him. So it was not necessarily a situation where Lot had to leave. Like, would Pharaoh have even known of Lot's presence? Would Pharaoh have even known that there was a connection between him, Abraham, and Lot?
And like you said, Lot has his own property. So he's independent, essentially.
Yeah, he's a wealthy nephew. So I'm like, that was my first thing, that Lot could have stayed in Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that was somewhat solidified for me, and like a little bit later on. There's a reference made to Egypt. And so I was like, he could have just stayed.
I don't know what you're talking about, so I'm looking forward to hearing your point.
All right.
Okay, so another thing that stood out to me was that here are these brethren, family, and they're not the ones directly having conflict, but they have their employees are having it, and it's not something that they can ignore. It's not something that they could carry on living comfortably without addressing. And it just it was just a reminder that conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen even among family. Yep.
For me, one of the things I found interesting is that they noted that Abraham had gained wealth, and we know specifically that he got some of it in Egypt from the Pharaoh, who was treating him nicely because of his sister wife. But then you also get the impression that throughout the course of his journey, he may have been becoming wealthier and wealthier. Yeah. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And I think we both have the same point in relation to mention of the Canaanites and.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So go ahead.
It's cool.
You have 3 points. I have 2.
So you did it too. I'll do the third one.
All right. So I found it interesting that it just seemed like an add-on.
Yeah. Why did they add it?
Well, why was this mentioned? And 2 things came to mind. Was that maybe this was the fact that we had these 2 groups of people also in the vicinity shows that there was an additional limit to resources. These resources also had to be shared amongst other groups of people. And then there was also the fact that this was also possibly a thing about these other people observing the feuding between the herdsmen of these 2 relatives. Yeah. So I thought those would look bad. Yeah. Anytime you have people observing like public feuding between family or like within close communities, it's never a good look. Yeah, it's never a good look. Yeah.
So we had a conversation about that. So I went to check out a couple of Bible commentaries, and one of them was also saying that it's possible that Lot and Abraham coming into the territory, they were the foreigners. These people who had been settled there before, and they may not have been necessarily welcome. So their feuding, their feuding could have been an opportunity for who could easily be considered their enemies to attack them and take advantage of their distractions over fighting with each other. So it was there could have been several reasons why it would not be good for them to be fighting in that land.
A weak point in their armor.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
No, not on this section.
Okay. All right. So we moving on to verses 10 to 18. So basically, we have Abraham. Abraham has told Lot, "Look around, you choose."
Mm-hmm.
And so Lot does exactly that. He scans the area, and he sees that the plain of Jordan is well watered. And one of the versions of the Bible, I looked at it and made reference to it being watered like the Garden of God,
Like
as an Egypt.
Eden. Oh, Egypt.
It said the Garden of God.
That's
and
true.
Egypt,
That's true. I remember that.
right? And so this is where Lot decides to settle. Right?
Ah.
And so Lot goes to the plain of Jordan, and Abraham lives in the land of Canaan. Right? And we're told specifically that Lot goes in amongst the cities of the plains, and he settles near Sodom. And then we are informed that the people of Sodom are wicked, and they sinners, and they sin greatly against God. And then the story transitions, and we are told that after Lot has left, God speaks to Abraham, and he says, "Look all around you. All the land you see will belong to you and your descendants forever. You will have as many descendants as there is dust on the earth. If anyone can count the dust, then your descendants can be counted." And then God instructed Abraham to walk through the land, for it was being given to him. And then Abraham moved near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, and he settled there and built an altar to God.
And that's the end of chapter 13.
And not a lot of drama, not a lot of fanfare. Like, the biggest thing is that the herdsmen feuding. Like, it's just a quiet, peaceful chapter.
Okay, so my first thing was that Abraham lets Lot have the first pick. And like, I don't know that is very characteristic of the time, because like, you read the Old Testament and you see a lot of it's very elder centric, you know, like that you look after your parents and you look after the elders in your community, and they are revered and taken care of
and given priority
and given the best. So for Abraham to offer the best to Lot is, I find it strange. And also, like, he's like, I'm assuming that's a gross assumption that Lot's wealth is directly
as a result of
Abraham and his generosity. I'm just assuming that, because like, here is this nephew who's younger than him, who he's taken with him, sort of adopted, and he's taking him throughout with him. I don't know how Lot could have accumulated wealth if it had not been given to him.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know. But yeah. And so I see it strange. I see it as something strange for Abraham to be like, you choose first. I'm cool with whatever. You're not sure what he's going to choose, if he's going to choose the best for himself or the best for Abraham, but you are comfortable with him choosing the best for himself by giving him first pick.
And I think Abraham was at that point because he was very aware that God had told him, "I will take you to the land that I have for you." So it means that whatever God allowed Lot to choose was not what God had for Abraham. Yeah. So I think that is launching into lessons we should apply for our lives. But I think
we mentioned that same lesson in we talked about something like that, like what God had for us. I don't know if it was we recorded chapter 12 so long ago. But yeah. But I think, I don't know if that's jumping ahead, but I think it also tells us about how things are not always as they seem. Because we see Lot choose what seems to be the greener pasture. And that's jumping ahead, but it's not necessarily going to be the best for him, as we see coming up. Yeah. And so, like, sometimes the grass isn't always greener.
We see that multiple times coming up.
Yeah. So this is not necessarily the best decision for him. And so yeah, maybe sometimes you let the older brethren pick for you, especially when they're being led by God. Yeah.
Okay, so my first point here was about how, or like what Lot took into consideration when making his choice. Like, as far as we know, it was based on one factor, and it was the source of water. And yes, that's important, especially if you have cattle. It means that there's a water source for them to drink from. It means that they will have a good supply of food. But like, that was the only thing he seemed to have made his decision on. And I think that's the point where I made the note that it was based on the land's similarity to Egypt, which was what I was referring to when I said about he could have just stayed in Egypt.
Yeah.
I feel like staying in Egypt might have saved him a lot of stress.
But that seems to be like another call forward to the Israelites. We wish we had stayed in Egypt.
Okay.
Situation.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's interesting to me, like, in my head, when I think of Egypt, I think of deserts and like famines and
we talked about that. We talked about it in chapter 12, like famine being the trademark of Egypt.
But like in this context, Egypt is the lush land and the green pastures. So that's interesting. That's interesting to me. Yeah. But another thing, I don't know if that is too far for what your points are, but I have about like Abraham seems to be blessed wherever he goes. And
except for Egypt.
Well, he kind of messed himself up. That was his fault. And I'm wondering if, like you said, if this was a case of God allowing Lot to choose what was not Abraham's. If it's an instance of God's favor following him, so wherever he goes he'll be blessed, or if it's God's providence that he will only go where God will bless him.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure. But I'm assuming that it's a combination. Yeah, it's a combination.
My point was that we're not like, while we know the factor that influenced Lot's decision, we don't have no kind of record or information about how Abraham made his decision. But the bottom line is that, as we see in the later verses, is that his decision had God's stamp of approval, because where he chose to go is where God said, "This is the land I'll give to you." And it may have been that God said, "Okay, you've chosen here, I'll give it to you," or it may have been God said, "Go here." Give him that nudge and like, "Go here," and then he's like, "You've gone here. This is what I want to give you." Like this one is a little unorthodox. Not really, but it's just like, God speaking to Abraham made me think of Lion King.
I'm waiting.
Because he tells him, look to the east, look to the west, look to the north, look to the south. All you can see, I will give to you. And I remember Mufasa telling Simba, as far as the light sees is our. Right. So I was like, the king talking to his son, showing him the extent of
his territory.
Yeah.
That's cool. My last point is that, and Abraham worships God again.
That's beautiful. Okay, so I don't know that. Did I mention? Yes, I did. Here's my thing, right? The chapter pretty much ends, but not ends, but like towards the end of the chapter, we see God talking to Abraham about making his descendants as plentiful as the dust on the earth, and like this is the land that his descendants will inherit. Like, we don't know how long Abraham has been on this journey for. Like, we don't have any kind of timeline, no kind of like milestone points to give us an idea of how long he's been on this journey so far. But we do know for a fact that he's older than 75, because we're told in chapter 12 that he leaves where he leaves his home at 75. So if God is going to make his descendants as many in number as the dust of the earth, you would imagine that he should have started already. like there should have been at least one dust grain already. At least one. So that's what I thought interesting. And we see no, or at least not at this point, we see no account of Abraham questioning that.
I wonder if he was considered a young man though.
We're not even taking that. We're not even looking at like the actual whether he's young or old, right? But this is at this point, as far as we know, this is a man with one wife, right? At this point. So it means that he's not going to be able to have more than one child per year. So even let's say he's young, he still has another 75 years ahead of him. He's still going to be able to have 75 children, right? Going forward. And that's not the dust of the earth. So I'm saying, if we're going dust of the earth, we need to start getting dust started. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. Alright, so
lessons. Okay. My ones, I think I only have 2 about God.
Mm-hmm.
And then mostly very simple. When God is with you, you set. Like you could see that happening with Abraham. What happened to the Egyptians? Was it a plague? I don't know. Something happens to them because his wife gets taken. His fault, yet God intervenes and he gets his wife back. And then he gets into a fight with his herdsmen get into a fight with his nephew's herdsmen. They decide to go their separate ways, and he gets like the land God promised to him. So that's my second lesson about God. When he gives a promise, you can believe him. Because this is me reaching forward to knowing that we know that his descendants do get this land, but this is the beginning where God has made the promise. And like TJ is saying, there is no evidence to point towards it happening. There's not this point. At this point, right? But God has made the promise, and we know for a fact that he delivered on it. And so that is my takeaway, that I can believe God's promises. Even though I'm at the point where there's no evidence to support it, one of these days, even though it's not in my lifetime, his promise is going to be fulfilled.
Okay. When we looked at chapter 12, I judged Abraham hard, because I was like, here you have God telling you to move without telling you where you're going, and you trust him, you leave. But you get to Egypt and you can't trust God to protect you and your wife, right? And I feel like God could have seen that and been like, so you're not trusting me now? Like, forget it. I'm not going to offer you the land anymore. You doubting me? Forget it. But that was not the case. God was still like, as a result of this, you're gonna get some more wealth. This was not the game plan, but I'm still not going to, abandon you. And so I think my point about God was that our past mistakes do not dictate God's ability or willingness to bless us in the future.
It's something we all need to hear.
Yeah. So that was, and I think that one resonated with me on a different level. That my mess ups yesterday will not does not impact God's ability or his willingness to bless me tomorrow.
That's beautiful.
My second point is that God is extra. Like, God could have just told Abraham that you're gonna have a lot of children, but God was like, you will have as many descendants as the dust on the earth, and not even like the dust in this desert, like, because that would have been enough. He was like, the dust on the earth. And so it feels like they're like, even when we try to put our finite and mortal boundaries around God's promises, there are no small promises with God. God goes big, like, all the time. There's no go big or go home. He's just like, we're going big. Yeah. So those are my two takeaways. But I think they were more reminders than actually this is a new concept. I think they were like, these were my takeaways from God. Moving on to I'm just gonna chip this one in. Moving on to about my personal things, right? Sometimes for the sake of peace and for family bonds, it's better to love people from a distance. Right? I think that I'm like, I use family here because like this was the literal situation in the story, but I don't think it has to be limited to family. I think sometimes the solution to discord and disagreements is to
Distance.
settle in different places. It does not mean there's less love. It does not mean that we're not family anymore. But I think for peace, as well as to manage what those around us are seeing and processing about us as a family in quotes, as a community in quotes, I think sometimes it's better to just settle in different areas. You go to the plain of Jordan, I will go to Canaan.
Yeah, and that's something I've been coming to terms with as an adult. I like, this is slightly off tangent.
Use the term adult very loosely in this house.
Yes. Disclaimer. Yes, I'm using that term very loosely. But this is a slightly off topic. But it's been something I've been trying to. I went from a point of literally living with my friends, to being in different
parts of the world.
Some of us is that true? For a mild moment, some of us were in different time zones. Is that true? Yes, for a little while, but then a lot of us we do it just in different countries, and we're doing different things, having completely different lives, and it's difficult staying in touch and being part of each other's lives, and it's been something I have to come to terms with, that like our friendships have to change because of our lives changing, and who we are is changing, and how we interact has to change as well. And just because there's going to be space and there's going to be distance does not mean that the love is not there, and that there are any hard feelings. And so that was my shade of this, my personal lesson from this. Just because, and even in terms of there not being conflict, just because there's distance, we're going separate ways, it doesn't mean that
we need to make the distance conflict.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's something we are quick to do, where when we feel space in relationships, like, you vex with me, you have a problem with me, and sometimes it's just that this is life. This is life. Yeah. Okay. What if you want to share one of your
another one is like taking a step back, and for Abraham it was a number of steps. He had to go in reverse, go back to where he came from. For some people it might have looked like he was moving in a circle. That is part of our journey. That's part of our story, that we need to step back, and sometimes we have to go to places that we're not intended to go. That's not our final point, and then come back to what I'm trying to say is, like, he had gotten to Bethel before, and he could have gone from Bethel to Canaan, and his journey would be done. But part of his journey had to send him to Egypt, and then back to Bethel, and then to Canaan. And so I think sometimes we feel like we should be there already, and we feel like we're going in reverse. We take one step forward and then 2 steps back, and it could be frustrating, it could be infuriating, it could be disheartening, and we just have to remember, God is the one leading, and this is part of our journey, and so it's just a matter of time before we fight with our nephew, and then we end up where we're supposed to go.
Luckily for us, we have no nephews.
Yes.
Yet. And I think, like you're saying, sometimes we have to go through that journey of going in circles because we're not ready for where we have to go yet. Sometimes they're positive traits we still need to build. They're negative ones we need to get rid of. So I think sometimes it's more about the process than the journey itself. And we need to sometimes be open to that yes, this journey is I feel like I'm going in circles, but if we are mindful of the process that's happening while we're going in circles, we may be, I don't want to say tolerant, but maybe a bit more open to the going in circles. my last two have to do with about like trusting God, and I think they are direct. What do I call that? I don't know. Like, I don't want to say translations because it's not a translation, but like, it's my
interpretation.
My 2 points about God, just reframed, personalized, that type of thing. So one of them is that I can trust God's promises to me as wild and as incredible as they may sound or seem. So like Abraham could have heard God say, "You will have descendants as plentiful as the dust of the earth," and he could have like, "I don't ever have a child," you know. But he chose to believe in that promise, and I think sometimes God may reveal or indicate plans or promises He has to us, for us, and we be like, "Me? I going to do that?" I never like to talk in public. Me? You know, me God want to do it. Me God want to. And so I think we need to trust that. You know, as incredible as wild as His promises may sound or seem, that we can trust Him.
Yes,
He got us.
Yeah. So most of my guys were from my most of my points, takeaways. My others were from Abraham, directly from Abraham. So, well, this one is from Abraham and Lot. I'm saying that, we were talking about that earlier. I think that as Christians, we don't always realize that people are watching us, and I think that should not be the reason why we behave, right? It should be the reason why we behave ourselves. But I think it's also something to consider, that our interactions with each other should be in a way that nobody could say, that's how the Christians behave. That's how they just treat each other. Like, I don't want to interact with them if that's how they just treat their own people. And so I think, especially in situations of conflict among each other, we need to be careful. And I'm not saying be I don't know how to describe what I'm saying. I'm not saying that just because you're being watched, you gloss over it. I'm not saying
be passive.
Don't be I'm not saying be passive about it, but I'm saying treat people well, as all the time, but especially when they're your people, because others are watching. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. And then the next one was, it's okay to offer the best pick to others. Like, so I've been trying to teach myself the opposite, because I normally keep the worst for myself. I've been trying to be like, it's okay, MJ, you could take the best, you know, like, you deserve it. But I think there are also points where you can offer the best to other people, especially what you think is the best, or you could offer them first pick, because I think we said this last time as well. What God has for you is for you. That nobody can take that away from you, and so you don't have to fight with anybody for anything. You don't have to you just have to do your best, work hard, and let God work it out. And so that, I think that's just freeing. That way you can be happy for other people who are succeeding. You can be happy for their successes. You can be happy when they seem to be going ahead of you, because that is what God has for them, and what God has for you is on its way.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And my last point is, like, over and over we see Abraham stopping. Sorry, I keep calling the man his new name. He's not there yet. He's not there yet.
That's why he had to go in circles.
Yeah, right. We see Abraham stopping and worshiping God, and usually it's before, at the end of one of his big moves, or before one of his big moves. And I think that is important. That, you know, when we making big moves, in our careers, in our lives, when we're making changes, I think it's important that not just we should keep God in the picture, but He should be the big picture. He's the main factor, and His will is the main factor.
A praise break.
Yeah. So I think I like TJ saying, not only asking God for direction, but praising Him for His leading so far. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And His leading in the future, because we have that guaranteed. Yeah.
Okay, so my last point, my last lesson for my life is my first point, just reframed, and it's that God will not hold my blessings hostage when I mess up.
I think that's beautiful. I think that is beautiful, and I think that's a great way to end our thing today. Our thing today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway from this whole, from Abraham's life,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. And like I don't think it's I don't think it's limited to Abraham. Like I think throughout the
Old
Testament that is a running theme, and I'm looking forward to so many other people we will be introduced to as we continue to go through Genesis, and how God does not hold their blessings hostage either.
Yeah. It's almost as if His blessing has nothing to do with like who we are or what we've done.
you think? Eh?
Yeah, it suspiciously seems that way. Yeah. I'm very suspicious. Okay, so we've come to the end of this episode of What Shall We Say to These Things?
I'm TJ.
And I'm MJ.
Until next time,
We're out.